Well, hello and welcome to Beyond the Sermon, a Bethany podcast where we have the privilege of digging deeper into our Sunday messages. I am Tami, and today I am joined with Pastor David Baxley and Pastor Steve Musto, and it's Christmas. I'm curious, guys, do you have your Christmas tree up?
Oh, yeah.
You do? I do too.
Yeah, we went early this year.
Okay.
Yeah, we did Christmas tree early.
Okay.
This year.
I have all four of mine up.
I was going to say,
I have all four of mine up.
Plural.
Wow. Yes, I was about to say, yeah, you know my house.
Okay, yeah. We have our one. We have our one tree. All right. Well, I'm excited. We are taking this adjective noun in one verse every week, and so let's dive in. Okay, so last week you were the one who brought us the message, and your phrase were wonderful counseling.
Yeah.
And you made it very clear that this was not someone laying back on a psychiatrist's couch and someone walking them through, what they're doing, but that our God is a supernatural planner. I think those are the words that I took away from what you said.
That's the right thing.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
And your choice of words this week is going to be mighty God.
Mighty God.
Mighty God. Okay. I know the one podcast that we did, we talked about Isaiah and being in prophecy.
Oh, yeah.
And we had someone who claimed to be a prophet pass away recently. So Hal Lindsey.
Yeah, Hal Lindsey.
So
a well-known guy who, So Hal Lindsey wrote the late great Planet Earth, and in the 1970s, he began to interpret the Bible based on modern sensibility. So looking in the Bible for clues about what it was saying about our world. And
so he obviously didn't have a pastor. He didn't have a pastor who said the Bible was not written to you, but for you.
It was written for us. Right? He would not agree with that. I think a couple things come from Hal. So all the Left Behind books, that whole thing, that's built on a foundation of Hal Lindsey. So Hal, in
he was
theological terms,
that way.
He was a dispensational premillennialist.
Yes.
That's a very fancy term so he believed that the Bible should be read as though God was at work in epochs of time, and God kind of worked differently in different eras. Okay. And so that's the dispensational part, and then the premillennial is when Jesus is going to return and all this stuff. So like many of what Hal was able to do, he's very creative, and he wrote well, and he was able to write in terms that people could understand. And so in this time when nobody was really writing about what apocalyptic literature meant or what prophecy meant, he took a lot of the pictures in the Bible that are hard to understand of locusts and dragons and all this stuff, and he turned them into modern pictures and then said, this is meant to convey something in the here and now. So this is one of the challenges of reading prophecy, because what we want to do with the Bible is we want to treat the Bible like we treat Google. We have a problem or an issue in our life. We read the Bible. We want the prescription. So this is why we're accessing the Bible. We're accessing the Bible to get something for us that we need. I'm feeling anxious. What should I do? My marriage is breaking up. Let me look at the passages on marriage. I don't feel peace. I need peace. That's why we access the Bible, which is not really how the Bible's supposed to be read, at least not regularly. And Hal read the Bible through his own lens, which was, what is the Bible? Let's forget whatever it meant to other people. What does it mean for us today? And the hard part of that, and anytime we talk about prophecy, anytime we talk about apocalyptic literature, I always bring up my professor who said to me, young man, the height of arrogance is assuming that God ignored the original audience to get a message to you. And that is what a lot of these folks who interpret the Bible and claim to be prophets and whatever get wrong. They skip what God was saying in the original to the original audience, and just assume that God is talking to us because we're the most important people in the world who have ever lived. So that is you can believe what Hal believed, and that's fine. But I think we have to say a couple things. One is he got lots of things wrong. And one of the marks of a prophet is you're not allowed to get anything wrong.
Well, and am I correct in the Old Testament, if a prophet did that, they were to be stoned?
Correct.
So,
and actually one of the things that Isaiah talks about, and this may come up in the message, I may not have time, is that the prophets are prophesying false things, and God is not happy about that. They're saying all this wonderful stuff, and God's like, things are not wonderful. You don't understand, and you're not prophesying for me. You're prophesying something falsely. So we at least have to say how, based on his own stuff, kept moving the goalposts. You know, the world was supposed to end, I think it was 1987, which was right in the middle of my high school career. I was really, upset about that. Like, I didn't want the world to end. But there were a lot of people around me who believed that because Hal had said the world is going to end 40 years after Israel had become a nation, which was 1947. If I'm remembering my dates, might have been 1949 and it was 1989, something like that. And then, of course, he moved. They all do. They all do this. And so why this is important for us to talk about, Isaiah is a prophet. He speaks for God. What he says comes true. It comes to fruition. But how we read prophecy is really important. And what we're always looking for in prophecy is we're just assuming the prophets are always talking about this is what's going to happen, that they're forecasting. That's not what the prophets are always doing. In fact, it's rarely what they're doing, is saying this is what is going to happen. What they're actually saying mostly is they're giving messages from God about what we should be doing now. People didn't have the Bible. They couldn't just open the pages of the Bible and read what God wanted them to do. The prophets were the living embodiment of God's message. And they would come and they would say, this is what God wants you to do and act this way. And here's a warning about all the things that have already been said are going to happen to you if you don't obey God. If you keep worshiping idols and stop going to the temple, and if you keep violating the Sabbath day, all these things are going to happen. God's already told you what's going to happen, and it will. So when we read Isaiah, instead of just what does this mean? What could this possibly mean in the future? We've got to stay in Isaiah's time to make sure we understand what is being said then. Only after we fully understand that can we say, okay, what is the implication then for later? But the starting point is that, what does this mean for us right now?
Okay, so now I'm going to try to explain that in Tami brain to see if I heard what you said.
Okay.
Is it like there's a blizzard going on right now? So I need to do what needs to happen in the blizzard right now, and I'm worried about the sunny weather that's going to happen tomorrow, or the rain that's going to happen tomorrow. Is that what you're saying? Like, we want to go to the forecast, but we need to live into they needed to hear what was happening right now. I know that's an analogy, but my brain is trying to understand what you were saying.
I think it's a little bit like, it's more or less, so to use that analogy, it's a good analogy.
Okay, it's rough.
There's a blizzard going on right now.
Okay.
What did we learn from the blizzard of 1979? What did we learn from the blizzard of 1984?
That we should have candles.
What did we learn from this happened. Let's make sure that we're pulling those lessons out. What we're not saying is, this is the blizzard of 1979. Okay. It's not. This is the blizzard of today.
Okay.
But there are things that we can learn from what happened then. Oh, and by the way, the weatherman back then said there are going to be blizzards in the future as well, and you need to be prepared and ready.
Okay.
So Isaiah this is where the supernatural comes in. He's a prophet. So he's not just saying they're going to be blizzards someday. He's saying here are the specific, so here are all the things that are happening right now. And by the way, there are going to be specific blizzards on this day and this time and that are going to mimic this. So you got to do the thing here in order to be ready for what's here. We jump right to the prophecy. What does this mean? What does this mean for us? And because there's some intrigue to that, but we've got to stop and park on what is going on in their world. And so I'm going to spend some time in the message unpacking what's happening militarily. I'm going to use a bunch of maps and show you what's happening. And because we've got to understand that part to get how Wonderful Counselor, Everlasting Father, Mighty God, Prince of Peace even matters. If it doesn't matter in their day, then it doesn't matter to us. But there's something being communicated to them very specifically that we need to pull out of that. I thought David did a great job with the idea of the planner, the supernatural planner.
Yeah,
that just set the table beautifully for this series, because that's who God is. So at a time when your life is chaos, when it feels like emergencies have happened, you're broken down on the side of the road, whatever, this is unexpected. What is a good reminder? Good reminder is, you know who's in charge of all this, right? You know that we have this one who's in charge, who's a supernatural planner. This did not escape his notice that this was going to happen. This is all part of this overall plan that he has. It's okay. This week, what we're going to say, he's mighty God. So not only did he plan, we all make plans. He has the power and the authority to make those plans come to fruition, which none of us has. We all can make plans. None of us actually has the power to make those plans fully happen the way we want them to. God does.
Prophecy is so tough to understand, especially when we look at Isaiah 9.
Yeah.
And he's saying things in past tense and all the stuff.
Do you have Isaiah 9:1? Can you read it?
So Isaiah 9:1 says, "Nevertheless, the gloom of the distressed land will not be like that of the former times, when he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will bring honor to the way of the sea, to the land east of the Jordan, and to Galilee of the nations." Okay,
so listen to the tense. The gloom of the distressed land will not be. Okay, so will not be like. So what is he doing? Where is he looking? Is he looking in the modern times? No. Is he looking in the past? No. He's looking into the future. So then he very specifically says that the future will not be like that of the former time. So now he's looking past when he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. So we read that and we go, okay, so he's forecasting something. Now here's the really confusing part about Isaiah. Ready? When this is being written, neither of these things has happened. So when he says the former times, when the Zebulun and Naphtali are going to be humbled, that actually hasn't happened yet.
The distress hasn't.
Right.
Yeah, they're not realizing what's coming in the darkness.
That's actually in the future.
Yes.
This is what's so hard about prophecy.
It's he's like writing a Star Trek movie.
Yeah, or like a Doctor Who episode. What timeline are we in?
But the average person wouldn't know that. So are you going to talk about what happened to Zebulun and Naphtali then? Okay.
Yeah. So and they're just part of Israel. Those are tribes of Israel.
Right.
So they're going to get wiped out by Assyria, and
because they're part of that northern kingdom.
Well, yeah, they're part of this little cabal that is going to try to come against Judah, and there's a whole intrigue that's going on behind the scenes geopolitically that's happening. But when Isaiah is writing this, he's writing this in past tense, future tense. But it actually hasn't happened. But Isaiah can see it happening. So what's he doing? This is what makes people want to toss the Bible into their back seat and say, look, I don't even understand this. And I totally get that. But here's what we can do. When we read something like this, we don't have to know when Isaiah is writing this, because he's writing it in a way that still makes sense. Even if we don't know all of the historical things that are happening, what can we glean as we read these things? That these lands were distressed in some way, The gloom will not be like the former times, but in the future, he's going to bring honor to this land called Galilee. So he's talking about the Holy Land. So we can at least get the big picture out. We don't have to know all of the details and plumb every part of it, but we know that Isaiah is saying something that seems to be a message of hope. And that's why he turns to verse 2 and says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. A light is dawned on those living in the land of darkness. And so what is that symbolizing? Well, light in the darkness, there's hope. Mm-hmm. And so as we read this, whether we understand all the pieces of it or not, we still can pull out of it that God is talking about hope here. And that's what we want to do. So God is giving a message of hope.
And I think it's important to understand too, as we come to these type of texts, if we start with that premise that we've been kind of setting up beforehand, which is there's something else happening this behind the scenes, instead of trying to read it to like, what am I supposed to do with this prophecy right now? Mm-hmm. And recognize I'm going into these texts to see what God is telling me about who he is and what he does. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily have to be the great scholar that knows all the history of all these things to still meet with God in these texts, to see God's character and to see what God is doing, as long as we don't try to do the Hal Lindsey thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's look at verse 6 and verse 7. This is what we're dealing with mm-hmm. in the series. For a child will be born for us. A son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders. He'll be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting or Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. The dominion will be vast. Its prosperity will never end. He'll reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom to establish and sustain it with justice and righteousness from now on and forever. The zeal of Yahweh of armies will accomplish this. Who's he talking about?
Well, Jesus. I mean, but from everything that you've just said, unless we've been wasting our time, he has to be talking about more than Jesus.
Absolutely. Yes. That's the point.
Okay.
Yes, you got it. Okay. So because just, and I've said this before, I think we've talked about prophecy. Just think about you're at your worst moment. Let's just say you're at your worst moment. You're like in a hospital. Somebody you love has just died. And I walk in and I give you a hug and I say, Tami, it's okay. And I want you to know it's okay. Hundreds of years from now, there's going to be someone else born and everything is going to be fine then.
You would not be a very kind friend.
That's like, who cares?
Right.
Hundreds of years from now that everything's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. Who cares? Isaiah is God is not unkind to these people. And this is the problem that I have a lot with the prophets, so-called prophets that are out there saying this means this means this. You're ignoring, unintentionally perhaps, you're saying that God is being unkind to these people by ignoring what they're experiencing in order to get this message in the future. And I don't believe God is saying, hey, don't worry about the fact that you guys are going to undergo all this stuff, that the Assyrian empire is huge and it's going to sweep in and wipe you guys. Don't worry about it, because hundreds of years after you've all been raped and pillaged and murdered and stuff, Jesus is going to be born. Mm-hmm. Isn't that great? No, it's not great. It doesn't feel great right now. So that's why we say that prophecy contains a now and a not yet. Mm-hmm.
Or an already and not yet.
An already and a not yet. Yeah,
right.
It can be.
Okay.
But if we're getting in the DeLorean and going back in time and sitting in their world, there's got to be a right now to this. There's got to be something to this that's more than just Jesus is going to be born. It's at least that, but there's got to be something else here as well. That is a big part of those 4 different descriptions given.
Well, and it's also understanding, though, it's a piece of something bigger. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this in this past series. We just were going through looking at the Old Testament law, how God was putting things in his kindness in place for Israel to experience his presence, to experience dealing with sin, to experience being able to be reconciled to God in those moments with him. But it could not be completed until the work of Christ.
Right.
It was what God was doing then, but not fully accomplished, but how God met them in his kindness then. And so I just say that to say, we see how God does this throughout the Bible, not just with prophecy, but how he engages with people throughout every interaction. We really see what he's doing.
One other piece that I think is really important for us as we read this stuff, and I know I'm not going to have time for this on Sunday. We get this romanticized version of the authors of the Bible. Like we picture the Apostle John sitting in a wood-hewn table with a candle, tapping the pen to his chin, and in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was
And there's
God.
probably
This is
music in the background.
Yeah, and he's just, as he goes to the market and he stops and just, hang on a second, I just thought of something else, and he writes it down, and that he's the one writing all this stuff. And there are many examples in the Bible of authors who probably wrote 100% of their book. Isaiah is not an example of that. If Isaiah, the named prophet, wrote any of it, it was part of a company of prophets. So we have, again, this sort of romanticized version of events. We think of prophets as being sole and solitary. They were not. Read 2 Kings and Elisha. Elisha is part of the company of prophets. Is it Gehazi that is one of the attendants to the prophet? He's part of and he's the one who actually goes out and talks to Naaman, who has leprosy, and deals with all that. So Gehazi is one of the parts of that. When Elijah is discouraged and says, I'm the only one left, what's he saying? Well, I'm the only prophet left.
But that's a lie.
And God says, no, it's not true.
That's true.
There's actually thousands of prophets in Israel. You just don't know. I haven't revealed them to you. I haven't shown them to you. Isaiah would have been part of a prophetic community or a part of a group of people. And we see this later on. Jesus has 12 disciples. And prophets would have had disciples. John the Baptist had disciples. So there would have been people that surrounded them. So Isaiah probably writes at least some of this, or at least dictates it to others. But even Isaiah, there are things that happen after Isaiah is off the scene, and they get written down. So, well, who's writing that? It's not the ghost of Isaiah writing that. These are the part of the company of prophets that are writing this down. That's another important piece that I'm not going to get. It doesn't necessarily fit into the overall message, but it doesn't make the Bible any less the Bible. It doesn't make it any less inspired. It absolutely is inspired, but sometimes we just grow. Our view of the Bible is just a little too simplistic. And so Isaiah would have been part of a prophetic community who would have been prophesying these things.
So my brain is still back with what you were sharing about us wanting to we want to make it about Jesus. We want to, even my mom, she's 82 years old. She goes to Google. She calls it the Google. She gets all of her answers from the Google. Right. And so if we are using God's word to do that, I can see I can receive the rebuke, realize that's a problem. I also think there's another reason that we do it. And possibly is we know Jesus is the ultimate. So we're just going, I don't know that it's always as self-absorbed as it may feel. Does that make sense at all? It's almost like playing Where's Waldo, where's Jesus, because that is the ultimate gift. So,
yeah, it's not that it's bad necessarily. The inclination is not bad, but let's use the most famous prophecy, as it were, maybe in the Bible, is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. That's not about you and your family.
Well, you kind of don't want it to be, because didn't bad come to them before that happened?
But to understand that, you have to go back and assume that God is not speaking to you. Us. Yeah. God is speaking to ancient people. So Jeremiah is prophesying to very different people. It doesn't mean that God
doesn't know the plans he has.
Doesn't know the plan. He absolutely does. So there's truth there. We have that verse, I think, hanging in our house, or at least we used to.
Well, and even on top of that, he was speaking to a people group, not an individual. We want to individualize every verse in the Bible as if it's written to David Baxley, right? Or Steve. Right. And that is, and also leads to the same problems we're talking about right now. Even in that one, talk about, this tension of kindness. God's writing that to a group of people. Not all of them are going to see that prophecy fulfilled. Right. It was for them as a people, as a community, but not every person that read that had the hope and future he was talking about. Yeah. Their kids did, or another generation did, but it wasn't just for every person reading that moment. It's a declaration of the work of God, not the individual thing God's going to do in my specific life.
And the reason is because there is no real specific personal walk with the Lord the way we have it today, because they didn't have Jesus. Yeah. They were reckoned as a people group. They were and judged and evaluated as a people group. They weren't evaluated individually. It was a very different relationship.
They were being graded on a curve
with God. Yeah, well, in a sense, we're responsible for us. We're very individualistic. Yep. They always thought in terms of community. Okay. They always thought of in terms of who's obeying and who is not. And the king was sort of the tip of the spear when it came to obedience, because he's the one who set the tone for the nation. And so you had a good king, things were going well. If you had a king that didn't want to follow Yahweh, things were not going well. And they were reckoned more as a people group. So Jeremiah 29:11 is about that people group, and God saying, look, you don't think I'm mean. I'm not mean. I've given you the opportunity to do all of these things. You're not taking that opportunity. But my heart, the heart behind it is that I want you to succeed. I want you to thrive. I'm giving you the opportunity to thrive. Take the opportunity that I'm giving you and the future that I'm holding out for you.
Well, because after verse 11, when we get into 12 and following, we see something that we don't like to talk about in prophecy when we want to apply it to ourselves, which is the if-then statements, which is this is there if you do this. Right. If you follow me like this blessing comes to you. We just want to go with a blessing, and we want to kind of skip. And that's the danger also of reading one verse, two verse, one chapter even of prophecy like this, and finding the thing that fits well for what makes us feel good.
Right.
So you chose this series because it is our Christmas series. And so we are going to see that Jesus is a wonderful counselor and a mighty God. But we rob ourselves of a richness if we stop there, if we don't see that he was a wonderful counselor to the people in Isaiah's days and a mighty God to them also. So this week you are going to be talking about mighty God. We have been talking about the already and the not yet. Help me see the already and not yet with mighty God.
Yeah, this is a hard one because if what we're saying is that there's some application to the Old Testament and to this specific time, what could it possibly mean that a child is going to be born and is going to be mighty God? Were there two Jesuses, one in Isaiah's time and one, in the New Testament? Is that who else could be called mighty God except the mighty God? And that term actually gets used in the next chapter, Isaiah 10, to describe Yahweh himself. And it is used in, I think it's Psalm 45 is Messianic Psalm, to describe Yahweh as well. So that idea, we can say somebody is going to be born who is a planner after God's heart, or is has a father heart of God, or brings peace to the world the way God would bring it. But we can't really do much with mighty God. We can't say that someone's going to be born who's going to be God. That only can be Jesus. Yeah. So what do we do with that?
We're so limited how we view names. That's really, that's ultimately the problem. If that's his name, then that must be only for that thing, for that person. That's his name, versus the idea of a theophoric names. which is the idea that it is it's the representation of God on that person, which could even be used for, someone might even use like an idea of that to say, this is the God I worship. But instead, if we were bring it to each of these names, because I've loved this as I've dived into this more, is the reminder of the mighty God, especially one, is saying this is the prophecy is about someone to which God will execute his power through to accomplish his plan that he's laid out. And it's the idea of association by God's power. It's not them that are doing it. It's the God working through them to do that and accomplish that, versus just that must mean only God.
So Isaiah, when you read Isaiah, it's a couple chapters before, I think it's 7, you see, it's either 7 or 8. There's a child born.
Yes,
and the child is supposed to be born. Is supposed to be named
Emmanuel.
Emmanuel. Yeah. Okay, but there's also a child who's named quick to the plunder, first to the spoils, or something like that. Yeah, that's his name. It's a sentence.
Yeah.
There are children who are named sentences.
Yes.
This wonderful counselor, mighty God, it's actually a sentence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I forget the exact translation, but it's something like the mighty, powerful
Wizard of Oz.
God who, who is a warrior God.
Yeah.
So our God is a warrior God.
Yes, the warrior God that accomplishes what he wants.
Yes.
Or something
like that. So that's what we read it as these 4 specific names, and we're teaching it that way because they're all in there. But they would have read it as a sentence describing a person. So Emmanuel itself is a one word, but its meaning is a sentence. God is with us. So these are all sentences that we're reading, and there's a piece of this that we have to remember in all that. So the person is being described with a name that is given from the Lord. So it's not necessarily that whoever is being talked about here is not specifically being called the mighty God, but that the mighty God is our whatever. Or what I'm using in the message is the example of a billboard. There's a difference between a billboard. You don't go to a billboard to do business with the billboard, with the company that is represented on the billboard. It represents a company that you do business with, and that's the idea. So it's okay to look at each of these 4 things, but we can't necessarily say that the child being born at this time, whoever this child is that they're talking about in Isaiah's day, is the mighty God.
And we also see this, though, through how even Jesus describes himself. He is the one that does the plans of the Father. He only does what the Father is telling him to do. Jesus is Jesus, the Son of God, but also he's carrying that same idea. Is he's representing the work of God. He is doing the work of God. He's accomplishing by God's power at work through him. He's with all his names. I want to get to it because it'll be fun to dive into it and the rest of the other names. But Jesus manifests that same idea, and even how he describes himself and the ministry that he does as representing these aspects that are being prophesied about here in Isaiah.
My head is spinning, so I cannot imagine what our people are thinking. So you are saying that the adjective noun that we have 4 times is really a sentence. And that sentence, literally, there was a child that was born.
Yep.
But that child wasn't mighty God. That child was like a signpost or a billboard pointing us to ultimately the mighty God.
Yeah.
Did I get that?
You did.
Yes.
Isaiah 8.
I bet you're all glad I said it.
I'm glad you said it. Isaiah 8, Yahweh said to Isaiah, take a large piece of parchment and write on it with an ordinary pen, Meher Shalal Hashbaz. And that literally means speeding to the plunder, hurrying to the spoil. I have appointed trustworthy witnesses over this. And so he writes that out, but that's actually somebody's name. So a child gets born, and that's what they name him. Speeding to the plunder, hurrying to the spoil. I can't imagine what his nickname was. But
Speedy Gonzalez. I mean, something.
They name him exactly that.
Okay.
And so this is part of their culture. So a child is going to be born. We're saying, we understand our world that this is referring to Jesus.
Yes.
But before we say it's referring to Jesus, we have to say it's also referring to somebody else in that day and time who is going to...
Who would have also brought hope to those people.
Bring hope and some sort of deliverance.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. This has been fun. And thank you for joining us. Have a great week. Bye-bye.